I got thrown out of, I hope you're recording this, no less than 5 investment banking offices. They just thought I was insane. Like, get out, get out.
Ross Smith is not your average investor.
A guy like me, I'm like the first wave, you know, the commandos. We, like I did in Australia, kick the door down.
It's a Tuesday morning, and Smith's on his way to the home he calls his mountain lair, high in the hills of New Zealand's North Island.
Am I making money? Yes, of course. Who works for nothing?
A venture capitalist for 2 decades, Smith has taken a wild ride through the early days of Australia's legal marijuana business.
I was heavily involved in the last .com boom, and I never actually thought I'd see another boom like it. But this green rush, or gold rush, or whatever you want to call it, now is simply remarkable. It's going to be absolutely huge.
Smith's home is one of 10 New Zealand properties he says he's bought with the millions he's made from marijuana investments. With his beloved $300,000 Bentley in the garage, he's living the dream. But it wasn't always this way.
Here's the funny part. Back in 1989, I was arrested and charged for cultivating cannabis with the intent to sell or supply, along with possession of cannabis with intent to sell or supply. At the time, 11 kilos in my house was a little bit, shall we say, above personal use. But I think I'm the only guy in world history that was fined. So having a cannabis conviction as a cannabis mogul, it's simply an occupational hazard. It's nothing to worry about. All right, talk to me.
Smith floated the first cannabis company on the Australian Stock Exchange in 2015. But he quit its board just 2 weeks later after being accused of making a death threat on Facebook to a critic of the deal. Smith insists he was hacked.
All very colourful, you know. That sort of thing is 3 years ago. Those sorts of guys, they are inherently jealous, and it's about as worrisome as a cloudy day, mate, seriously.
No truth to it?
No, none whatsoever. Mate, the bill as it stands, even as it's before the steering committee now, it's there in black and white.
Today, Smith's hatching his latest medicinal cannabis deal.
It's going to become like fish oil.
He wants to export the plant from Queensland into New Zealand after the Kiwis legalise medicinal cannabis later this year.
Principally, we're going to supply out of Australia via a licensed facility.
Smith is a medicinal cannabis evangelist, spruiking it as a new wonder drug.
Seizures taken care of, rheumatoid arthritis, even pets. I saw a video this morning, I don't know whether you saw it, that boxer dog was having seizures. And the guy gave it a little eye drop of CBD oil, and bang, brought the dog straight out of seizures. He had a normal dog again. Since
Smith's first venture, the value of listed Australian cannabis companies has soared to $1.5 billion.
Mate, eventually all pharmacies will stock it.
Smith's not the only one attracted to the scent of big money.
There's dodgy companies everywhere. Yeah. I often say, in the spec end of the market, there are wolves in the forest. If you can't handle the fact that there's wolves in the forest, don't go into the forest. It's real simple. Stick to BHP, Rio Tinto, ANZ, National Australia Bank.
Are you one of those wolves?
I am called the wolf, but I am in the market for all the right reasons.
Back in Australia, the medicinal cannabis industry is starting from scratch, working hard to build a clean corporate image. G'day, Peter.
Good
How
to
are you?
Good to come on in.
Thank you. So this is the place?
This is the place.
In an outer Melbourne suburb, we're visiting Australia's first licensed medicinal cannabis growing rooms. It's a high-security environment with no external signs to indicate what's going on inside.
Yeah, come on through.
We can't identify these workers in case they're targeted by criminals. The federal government's Office of Drug Control bans anyone with connections to illegal marijuana from working here.
Our cultivators and our cultivation team can't have had any experience with cannabis before. That's part of the screening process we do on the way through.
So you haven't been able to go out and say, if you've been growing cannabis illegally and you have a level of expertise, please come and work with us?
I've been approached by plenty who have said, I'm really good at growing this. How do I get involved in the legal side of the industry? Step one is don't apply. That won't cut it with the Office of Drug Control.
The number of plants growing here and their varieties are secrets closely guarded by the listed company that owns them, Can Group.
So Sean, come on, have a look through here. So this is the start of our process. We've got the mother plants. The grower here is just working on propagation stage. So what we're doing is taking cuttings from the mother plants, go into the propagation cubes.
Can Group's CEO Peter Crock spent over 20 years in agribusiness developing farm products. Now he's growing high-grade marijuana. This is one of 3 growing sites owned by Can Group. It's hoping to harvest up to 6 crops a year.
In terms of agriculture, scale is everything. Doesn't matter if it's growing wheat or what it is, we know that. And that's what we're looking at. We need to set up at scale and be able to play in that space.
Can Group is growing cannabis for a surprising customer, the Victorian government.
Good to go? Yeah, good.
The plants being harvested here will become medicine in a government trial for children with severe epilepsy. Last year, Can Group secured the first Australian cannabis licences, boosting its market value to $400 million.
If you look at a company such as the Can Group, which listed in May last year at 30 cents a share, is now trading at $3. So from a capital gains perspective, people who bought those shares at 30 cents have done very, very well, assuming they've sold it.
Unlike most so-called pot stocks, Can Group has attracted interest from the big end of town. Its backers include Elliston Capital, part owned by billionaire James Packer, with a shareholding worth $6 million. There's also global investment bank Canaccord Genuity, which helped float Can Group and holds a $6 million stake.
What's getting investors excited is this is the ability to be on the cusp of a clearly emerging industry where there will be a whole bunch of new economic activity and obviously great investment opportunities as a result of that.
But it's still some way from making a profit. Could you hazard a guess at when you expect to turn a profit?
No, I won't hazard a guess at that at the moment. So we're just focused on making sure we can get our crops through this small facility.
If you do have a company that is consuming cash, that it's not absolutely clear what the demand, when the demand will be, and what the revenue, when that revenue will kick in, that is a speculative investment. And people are happy to put that in with the understanding that it is risky, but if the risk plays out, they could make a lot of money.
On Australia's west coast, researchers are about to explore one of the myriad possible medical uses for cannabis unlocked by the end of prohibition. Funding the research is Harry Corellis, who's got a science degree and 25 years' experience in the finance industry.
I can see it through the lens of not only from a medical perspective, but also from a capital markets and investment perspective. So when the two meet, when you see a brand new industry opening up globally and you see that it's inevitable it's coming to Australia, and there's no reason it shouldn't come to Australia, then that presents an investment opportunity.
Corellis has spent 18 months convincing state and federal health authorities to give the green light to a pioneering clinical trial. In a world first, researchers at the University of Western Australia are about to test whether a cannabis medicine can treat insomnia.
We see insomnia as a market or a condition that we have a high degree of confidence that will respond to cannabis therapy. It's a big market in its own right. I think 1 in 6 people suffer from some kind of sleep disorder, and insomnia is one part of that fraction. The anecdotal evidence is certainly out there that people feel as though they relax and can go to sleep using cannabis.
This one measures airflow through your nose and mouth.
24 volunteers will be given cannabis for 2 weeks and a placebo for another fortnight.
Okay, Debbie.
Finished product.
You can stand up.
Okay. Oh.
Oops. Yeah.
Their sleep will be measured both in the lab and at home. When advertising for participants, researchers didn't mention they would be taking cannabis, only revealing it after they volunteered.
None of them have said, oh no, I don't want to be involved. They might have been a little bit surprised, but they're not against using medicinal cannabis to treat their insomnia.
Was that at all surprising to you?
Yeah, I thought that there might be a few people that would say, oh no, I can't use that, I'm not interested. But we haven't experienced that. Okay, Debbie, I'm going to get you to lay there with your eyes closed.
Okay.
One problem with cannabis being illegal for so long is the lack of hard data about its medicinal effects. As more countries legalise its use, clinical trials like this are starting to become more common.
That's great. Now staring at a spot on the ceiling again.
Corellis company is also running a trial in Chile for autism, and in Spain it's researching treatment for breast cancer.
It's going to be a multi-billion-dollar market in total, but it's going to be built up of lots of players selling an insomnia product in Germany and an autism product in Canada, and you add that up, it's a multi-billion-dollar market for sure.
Corellis is a founder of another West Australian cannabis company. Ozcan rivals Can Group as Australia's biggest cannabis company, also with a market value of about $400 million.
But that's life, that's happening everywhere, right?
It was founded by a politician, former federal Liberal MP and avocado grower Mal Washer.
So basically, Elaine, these will be picked, as you know, beginning of August.
Washer had a job convincing his family to join him, including his microbiologist daughter, Elaine Darby.
So I got them involved and said, how about this, right? Now, they thought I was a fruitlet, right? I mean, you know, I went into federal politics. I won't say what they said about that. It was not favourable, can't be repeated in camera. This had the same reaction. What, has he hit his head or something? You know, ring up mum and said, you know, what the hell's happened to him now? You know, he's not taking the stuff or anything strange. Anyway.
Most Australians haven't really, if they haven't had anything to do with cannabis at all, that if you're suddenly broached to say, hey, the family's going into the cannabis business, you know, it is a little surprising, to be quite honest.
Here's the problem we have.
Ozcan plans to grow cannabis and produce a medicine targeting chronic pain. But when it started out, there was a problem. None of the team had any experience growing marijuana.
You've got in an industry where, you know, you have the doctors and the scientists and our pharmaceutical team, but we're here and we know how to make pharmaceuticals. We still need cannabis genetics. And the problem is the only place you find cannabis genetics to kick off, unfortunately, is some real colourful characters. So it's one of those really bizarre industries where you're getting this interface with these individuals.
The company hired a cult figure in the global marijuana underground, a man once dubbed the king of cannabis, Australian Neville Makers.
Neville is a fascinating person. Yes, King of Cannabis is his kind of name in the industry. And he had expertise, he had access to genetics.
There is particular cannabis strains that are named after him still today. You know, there's Neville's Haze and all these various weird and wonderfuls.
Makers gained global notoriety in the Netherlands as a cannabis breeder and seed merchant. But in 1990, his global enterprise was targeted by US authorities, who charged him with 44 drug offences.
So when Mr. Shoemakers came to Perth to visit his family, he was arrested at Perth Airport on an extradition treaty between Australia and America. He has committed no crime in Holland and no crime in Australia.
Makers was only released on bail after almost a year in a Perth jail.
I just want to live with Trish and Daniel and be happy.
While on bail, Makers vanished.
The last time I saw him was at 5:30 on Tuesday afternoon, and I haven't heard or seen from him since.
Makers fled the country, and in 2003, the US dropped the charges. Years later, he returned to Australia, and in 2014 became a founding shareholder in Ozcan. How concerned were you initially about bringing somebody with that reputation into a company that you were trying to establish?
Yeah, look, that's certainly something to consider. I mean, certainly he hadn't broken any Australian rules by any stretch of the imagination. However, yeah, he did have the issue with the Americans. For us, it wasn't a problem initially in terms of what we're looking at doing there.
The company was looking to access Makers' famous seed collection held in the Netherlands.
I mean, his collection that he had in his day overseas was an enormous range of various varieties and strains of cannabis. And when you're looking to wanting to produce a therapeutic product, that's absolutely fantastic that you had that whole range of potential strains there that could produce all these different kind of compounds at the end of the day.
In return for the promise of his expertise, the company gave Makers 14 million shares. And what did you get for that?
Well, we got a lot of entertaining lunches and dinners with Neville, and
But his seeds were never delivered.
unfortunately, we were unable to access those at the end of the day. And that was a lot due to the rules and legislation in those particular countries where they were sitting. They couldn't sort of be accessed. So unfortunately, we had to move on from that.
Makers remains a large shareholder in Ozcan.
I think Neville is the number 2 or number 3 shareholder, and I think on today's prices it must be $30 million plus worth of value.
Ozcan is not the only company that has tried to capitalise on the king of cannabis. Mr. Gu.
Hi, Sean.
Great to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks
How are
for
you?
Coming on this way. Singapore-based Philip Gu is chief executive of Stemcell United, a traditional Chinese medicine company with big plans to break into the cannabis market.
Hi, Sean. This is about Joseph Ben and the hemp.
Right. I didn't know that he was interested in hemp.
In fact, it's much more interested than what you think and what everybody knows.
Okay.
Yeah.
When Stemcell first listed on the stock exchange, it promised to make face masks infused with extracts from a rare orchid.
All plants.
Then in March last year, Stemcell hired Makers as a medicinal cannabis consultant, handing him 10 million shares and a $5,000 monthly retainer.
His involvement as an advisor, and actually that gives us confidence and knowledge and boost for our company's confidence and knowledge as well, because his status, everybody knows him, king of cannabis.
The announcement sent the share price rocketing, boosting the company's market value from $4 million to $130 million in a day. 6 months later, Makers resigned as a consultant.
I think we've seen, unfortunately, in this space, quite a few companies that have suddenly appeared out of nowhere. They'll make an announcement, share price spikes up, everyone, yay, we sell, and there's quick bucks have to be made. So unfortunately, there has been a bit of that going on.
Is your company in this for the long term? Is it genuine about wanting to produce medical cannabis products, or is it just in it for a bit of a quick buck?
We have no intention doing those so-called quick bucks. And we went long term, not only because my personal, but also my profession. And we went long term. And long term, we want to be in the long-term development.
Meanwhile, Neville Makers is as elusive as ever. We tracked him to the tiny northern New South Wales town of Benalbo to try to get his side of the story. But the king of cannabis was nowhere to be found. Mr. Good, where is Neville Makers now?
I'm not sure where he is now.
I don't know where Neville is. Unfortunately, I haven't spoken to him for years.
Despite the money pouring into the cannabis industry, patients are still struggling to access the drug. Since legalisation in Australia in 2016, medicinal cannabis has only been prescribed to about 600 patients. Experts mostly blame complex state and federal rules.
The regulatory system is a complete basket case here in Australia. Each and every state has a different regulatory framework in place. There's the federal, TGA that also has a say. So even if the GP feels that medicinal cannabis is the appropriate treatment for a patient, it's very, very difficult to access it. So there are huge barriers that need to be overcome before patients actually have access to medicinal cannabis here in Australia.
Those barriers are forcing people like Jen and thousands like her to seek their own supplies outside the law. Every month, Jen drives from her Gold Coast home across the New South Wales border to buy medicinal cannabis on the black market.
I feel actually very nervous making the journey, not so much on the way there, but particularly on the way back when I've got my products in hand.
Jen is dying from mesothelioma, cancer caused by asbestos exposure.
There's 4 products and they have specific uses.
She spends $700 a month on medicine she says helps relieve pain and nausea.
And this is the strongest one. And this is
Jen's oncologist can only prescribe her medicinal cannabis after securing permission from both federal and Queensland health authorities. That takes time she doesn't have.
I understand it's a process that takes between 7 to 10 months, which actually, if you're a standard mesothelioma patient on a normal late diagnosis, you're gone. You don't live normally that long, unfortunately, and that's the sad truth.
How would you describe the current system?
Inefficient, Byzantine, and to be honest, quite obstructive. If you look at what's been happening over the last 18 months, where people have got frustrated, is there has been a lot of political currency put out there in terms of we are going to provide access and bring materials in, but that's not translated into the reality.
Federal Health Minister Greg Hunt has been a strong advocate of medicinal cannabis. 10 days ago, he convinced the states to work towards a single national approval scheme.
Basically, We've got a one-stop shop process with New South Wales. That proves that it can be done in under 48 hours, and there should be no excuse for any state for not joining the one-stop shop process.
So essentially, the states need to get out of the way.
Look, my message is I respect deeply their approach, but this is about patient access. This is about ensuring that those people where the doctors make the decision that it's in the interest of the patient have the access to that material.
We've still got a long way to go to match the patient access schemes that are in place in some other parts of the world.
And how much of a risk does that present to your company and other companies in this industry?
Yeah, I guess if you're Australian domestic focused only, that's a big risk if you're putting all your eggs in that one basket.
What this will do now...
The prospect of the local industry stalling prompted a surprise announcement from Greg Hunt that Australian companies would be allowed to export medicinal cannabis.
Our goal is very clear, to give Australian farmers and manufacturers the best shot at being the world's #1 exporter of medicinal cannabis.
What were your concerns about the viability of the domestic medicinal cannabis market that led you to bring forward the decision to allow companies to export?
Well, many companies have said that they would have a stronger position for cultivation and research and manufacturing in Australia if they had both a domestic and an international market. I agreed with that. I thought that would strengthen the Australian market, but on an absolute condition that any company that's to be granted an export licence would sign a guarantee that Australian patients would have first access.
The announcement fired up cannabis stocks. Within a week, Can Group's share price shot up by 1/3, while AusCan's more than doubled.
Look, the potential for that is enormous. I mean, it opens us up to the whole world, because what we're finding is that countries all over are now legislating to allow medical use of cannabis. So it's sort of like all these countries are opening up all the time.
Please give a rousing round of applause from Canopy Growth, the largest, arguably, cannabis business on the planet, Bruce Linton.
One international company investing in Australia is the $5.5 billion Canadian firm Canopy Growth Corporation. Its founder and CEO is Bruce Linton, who is also a director of West Australian company AusCan.
We tend to say that we're the largest producer of cannabis in the world that publishes their address.
Canada already has medicinal cannabis, and later this year, it will legalise marijuana for recreational use.
And how they're going to evolve.
Hey,
how are you? Nice to meet you.
Linton was in Sydney recently to drum up investor interest.
Reefer madness is over. This crazy country, this Mad Hatter place called Canada is doing it. And I think it couldn't be a better place to launch it because, you know, we are relatively well-mannered, pretty boring. We like structure. Our governments are going to be selling it. So when you come to Canada next summer, maybe about September, you're going to line up at a store run by the state or provincial government. All the employees, and most of them will work for the government. And they'll be selling products that have been described and defined by the federal government. And all you need to have is the money and your ID to say that you're over 19. That sanctions and validates a whole bunch of things that I think is going to catch the globe and say, wow.
Yes, sir.
In Canada, Canopy Growth has partnered with rapper Snoop Dogg to promote its medicinal cannabis products.
Snoop's just about to go on. Let's get it.
Its main brand, Tweed, even has a clothing line.
And what does the back say? Hi. Hi. You know what I mean.
Canopy has registered the Tweed trademark in Australia for both medicinal and recreational cannabis. So is this very clearly a positioning for the potential advent of recreational use in Australia?
Yeah, we do. So every country that's federally legal, We think someday we'll start with medical, and don't know when, there's a path that they go to managing the whole topic. And the reason is, it isn't being introduced as a new thing. Bad news, it exists everywhere in a large volume, and so we think it's just a natural progression. So Australia, Germany, everywhere. If we've, and I gotta keep track of my lawyers, I don't keep track of how much they spend doing these things everywhere, but it is kind of the mandate. Prepare for the future. Have things ready.
Linton's company has also hired top-tier lobbying firm Crosby Textor to help it in discussions with Australian governments. You have engaged an Australian lobbyist, Crosby Textor? Yeah?
I think that's true.
Yeah. I'm just wondering what you are using them for.
Well, I gotta be totally truthful. I don't know exactly. What we use them for in most countries is what we try to do is frame the Canadian experience and use indications of what worked.
A company called Canopy Growth Corporation, which is a major shareholder in an Australian company called Auscan, is listed on the register of lobbyists for the Australian Parliament using the firm Crosby Textor. I'm just wondering if you know why that would be and whether you've had any meetings with either Crosby Textor or Canopy Growth.
I have met with international firms and I've met with Australian firms. And
what did they want to talk about?
People are all talking about access to the Australian market and understanding the regime.
In the northern New South Wales counterculture capital of Nimbin, people have been lobbying for the legalisation of marijuana for decades. The town's preparing for its annual Mardi Gras festival.
Take a few. That's how we get people to come.
Yeah. Anyone that's visiting.
I got no TV ad.
Yeah.
Nimbin's home to the Hemp Embassy, a tourist attraction doubling as headquarters of the Australian Hemp Party.
G'day, Michael.
Yeah.
How you going?
Andrew.
How are you? Long time no see.
Yeah.
Its secretary is Andrew Kava Sillas, who's founded his own medicinal cannabis company. He's also betting on marijuana being legalised for recreational use.
They are getting in trouble for it.
It's certainly on our mind. We'd be, a pretty dishonest company to not be thinking in that way. And I think how, in the natural course of the progression that we see, I think you're going to have to really be able to prove yourself as a good producer of medical grade cannabis before you can look to, get into the recreational side. We are certainly eyeing off recreational as another form of revenue in the future. Yep.
And how big do you think that market could be?
Maybe 10 times the medical side. Yep.
Kava Sillas is a pioneer of the cannabis industry.
Yeah. So staying here. A lot of the males. Yeah. And they're coming on really well. You can see nice flower there. They'll produce a lot of pollen for these immature females that we're still looking at here.
Kava Sillas is licensed to grow these plants for his hemp food company. They're low in THC, marijuana's psychoactive ingredient.
So there is a female over here, this one here. I'll just pull it over. What we're looking at here is actually first of the seeds. The plant's been pollinated.
The medicinal cannabis boom has catapulted the veteran campaigner headlong into the world of big business.
This has interrupted my normal job, my normal vocation. So, yeah, those benefits are greater, but I've never been busier in all my life either. I do a lot of travelling now. I'm hardly ever home. I'm always in meetings and talking to people and conference calls.
Last year, mining company Queensland Bauxite Limited bought 55% of Kava Sillas's medicinal cannabis startup to break into the market.
But I see the potential of that deal, for me personally, will be quite beneficial if what we're saying comes to fruition.
Has it made you a wealthy man?
wealthier than I've probably ever been, yeah.
At his home outside Nimbin, Kava Sillas shows us one prize the mining company paid to access. It's the holy grail of medicinal cannabis, a rare seed bank collected from around the world.
It's quite extensive. Some of the oldest ones that we have are these kind of samples, and these are from various regions in China, even Yellow River, and we actually had 2 different Yellow Rivers. You've got Jiangxi, a particular one called Lulu, some very old, what was referred to as Indian hemp, or Yellow River number 3. And then, yeah, there's European varieties that are very important.
Kava Sillas reckons his seeds could deliver an even bigger payday.
Any statistic you look at, Australians enjoy using cannabis more than any other illicit drug, and they try to do it quite reasonably and responsibly. And so, on that fact alone, it is inevitable that Australia will legalise, tax and regulate recreational use of cannabis.
But other Australian companies aren't so sure. Given the potentially enormous size of the legal recreational market globally, how likely do you think it is that Australia will eventually be compelled to move down that track as Canada has?
Eventually, maybe, but I see that on a 5 to 10 year time frame, and I don't think it will happen in the immediate future, and our focus is definitely not in that area at all.
How much has AusCan thought about it?
As a recreational product, not at all. It's a completely different mindset to where we are as a company.
You'd be very well placed to take advantage of it.
Yeah, look, I think those that are in the pharmaceutical sector with cannabis would probably be the best place to do it, because we already would be producing a very high quality raw material that could then be changed into a different kind of product to make something for the recreational market.
Look, it's been interesting that a number of jurisdictions such as Canada, Uruguay and states in the US, once they have made cannabis available for medical purposes, and they've seen that that hasn't resulted in a whole deterioration of society, have become a lot more liberal and contemplated or indeed enacted the recreational use, so the use for non-medical purposes.
Last month, a state parliamentary inquiry told the Victorian government recreational use of marijuana for adult use is a law reform worthy of exploration. Do you have a personal view on whether it would be acceptable for recreational cannabis to be allowed in Australia within 5 or 10 years?
It's not something that the Commonwealth is proposing, but it is a matter for individual states under the Constitution.
In New Zealand, they're also preparing to debate the legalisation of recreational cannabis. The country's Prime Minister has pledged to hold a referendum before the next election in 2021.
What I believe is happening is there is no question in my mind that medical cannabis is the Trojan horse for recreational cannabis, and I don't believe it's a bad thing.
Meanwhile, from his North Island retreat, venture capitalist Ross Smith is about to land his next big deal. He's finalising plans to import cannabis from Queensland.
An investment banking colleague asked me the other day on the phone, he said, Ross, you know, you're making all this money, where to next? What are you going to invest in next? I said, mate, I'm investing in cannabis for the next 10 years. As long as the party's only just beginning. I mean, people have got no idea how big this is going to be. This is going to be huge.
There's lots of talk about the potential riches to be made. But for those wading in, there are also plenty of risks.
There's no doubt, as with any new industry, there's a flurry of people jumping on board, jumping on the bandwagon, and there will be a shakedown as a result of that.
There is always the early movers, there is growth, then you have the late arrivals, and then not everyone can win.